And joining us now to talk about the state of the international economy, Jagdish Bhagwati. He is professor of economics at Columbia University, and we're very happy to have you in that chair with us tonight, sir.
I'm delighted to be here.
We should mention that you're in town, or in the province of Ontario, I guess, for a conference at CG this weekend, the Centre for International Governance Innovation in Waterloo.
Right.
So I'll see more of you this weekend.
Oh, wonderful.
We now know the G20 is it. The G20 will replace the G8 as the main forum in which to address the world's economic agenda. In your view, is this a good idea?
I think it's a very good idea. And in fact, it was already happening. It's just being formalized because G7 had already gone to G8, as you remember, with Russia being included, against a lot of objections by conservatives in the United States. And that was a very good idea. And at the same time, you know, the other 12 had been attending the G20 meetings already. So this is now made into a formally, you know, attractive structure and formalized structure. I used to tell my friend, the Indian Prime Minister, that it was probably a good idea to be an observer rather than a full formal member, because you could get to each of the banquets without having to do any of the work.
Now he's got to work.
But now they're going to be actually involved in the deliberations.
Well, tell me this, is it, you know, you've heard the criticism that a G20 will be, oh my goodness, unwieldy, ridiculous conversations, discussions going on endlessly, and at the end of the day it will actually be harder to get things done. What do you think of that?
I don't think so at all, because it's still a very small number. And I think even in big places like the World Trade Organization, there are over 190 or such members, people, it's totally unwieldy. But typically on issues, people tend to subdivide and form the little groups and then come up with ideas, which then go to the larger group. And you see that in the results of the G20 in Pittsburgh, because they did arrive, you know, after a whole lot of deliberations and work by the Sherpas, the bureaucrats who really do the spade work, that they did come up with things which really were of some importance, well, actually, again, in the financial sector.
The critics say that what they came up with was a pretty watered-down communique at the end of the day, and they didn't take far-reaching efforts. You disagree with that?
But far-reaching efforts may be counterproductive rather than good.
So
there's nothing necessarily good about having extreme positions propounded. I think there's a great advantage in having things sort of sorted out and then to take modest steps, because I think if you take extreme steps, they will almost certainly will not be fulfilled. And we see that in the climate change treaty, which wasn't being really discussed in a meaningful way at this conference. You undertake massive obligations in terms of emission reductions, knowing full well that nobody is going to fulfill them. It's much more sensible to have smaller steps, you know, on which you can build further steps.
Let me follow up with this. Edward Luce wrote this last month in the Financial Times. He said, if you want to find out what the world is going to do, then take the U.S. position and take China's position and draw a line somewhere in the middle. That, according to David Rothkopf, a former official in the Clinton administration. As regards to the G20, it would have been more efficient to kick Canada and Italy out of the G8 and invite China and India to replace them. But intergovernmental cooperation always adds, it never subtracts. How do emerging countries in the world like India feel when they hear talk of not G20, not G8, but G2, US, China, period, full stop?
Yes, well, I don't think G2 makes a great deal of sense, simply because there are commonalities between democratic countries and the United States. It's true that the Chinese have a whole lot of reserves right now. They're a big player in the world economy, but if you take the size of their economy, it's still relatively small. The per capita income is small. Poverty is still very considerable. It has none of the features of really major advanced countries, and it doesn't have a democracy. So I think the reason why the Americans sort of go with it is because they're bilaterally, they see that some of their fears can be addressed. But it cannot amount to a hill of beans as far as world governance is concerned, you see. So I personally think that, you know, that it just fits into the model I was describing, that for specific issues, like the, you know, reserve currency and the role they will play with their reserves and so on, they're important. But that doesn't mean they're important for a whole lot of other things which we want to discuss.
Would you have preferred they just reconfigure the G8?
I don't think it matters very much because this is a historical accident. I mean, like Canada used to be part of what used to be called the Quad, which is the four areas or countries: EU, US, Japan, and Canada to take initiatives on trade. Now you might ask, why did Canada figure in there and not any of the other big countries?
Because we're so wonderful.
No, I mean, that's true. Since I believe in an infinity of lifetimes like Shirley MacLaine, I hope I'll be born Canadian in my next one. I'm being very virtuous right now. So, but I do think, I mean, these are matters of historical accident. And once a system is working reasonably well, it doesn't matter whether you add another 2 on this, and whether they're called G6 or G4. I think there's no question that India and China and Brazil and South Africa are being listened to with much more attention than ever before. And and there's really nothing like an inner group that survives today, in my opinion. This is just a historical subset. So I don't think people should really work themselves up into a frenzy.
Okay.
Like, I'm not part of that inner sanctum, because there ain't no inner sanctum.
Well, try this, because some Canadians may be a little bit sensitive about this, and I appreciate that in a future life you would like to come back as a Canadian. That would be a delightful thing. We know Canada belongs to the G8, but does Canada really belong in the G8? Honestly.
Yes and no. I think there is something like a historical continuity. In that sense, it does. Now, if you, again, in terms of whether in fact they belong in terms of the size of their economy, you could argue about that. But on the other hand, remember, there is also the role that you've played historically, which is that of an honest broker between the United States and the rest of the world. I mean, I recall Lester Pearson, for example, Pierre Trudeau. These were world-class leaders, played a massive role in actually mediating between sometimes reluctant United States or excessively trigger-happy United States and the rest of the world. So you're a multilateral force. And I think that's a role which I think entitles Canada to continue playing a more significant role than just income, per capita income, or income would suggest. I think that leadership, I think you are getting now. I think with Mr. Harper, and I happen to know Mr. Ignatieff well because I've lectured in his class. My daughter used to work for him and got me to lecture, and I was very impressed as to what a remarkable man he was. So either way, you're going to play an important role. And you saw Mr. Harper, for example, during the conference with President Obama. He actually went out of his way to say that Canada was in fact even not merely just going to hold the line, but actually go ahead and liberalize. Of course, my cynical reaction was that if he says he's going to liberalize in a time of crisis like this, that means he's decided he isn't going to win. But that was just a cynical reaction.
Let's follow up on that and talk more international trade here. You are one of the world's best known advocates of globalization and trade liberalization. How optimistic are you that globalization will progress given the current economic climate?
Well, I think given the current economic climate, I would say that globalization in the sense of trade, I assume you mean, that moving forward is very difficult. And the Prime Minister was very, as I said, was very bold in saying he was going to liberalize. The President was totally silent virtually. And he feels much more constrained about this. So moving forward, historically, it's very difficult in democratic countries. I don't know of any dramatic example where people have managed to liberalize trade. But there's also the question of sliding back into protectionism. That is where I think, I do see that while there's been some sliding back, it's not been anywhere near like the tsunami we had in the 1930s. No.
So the Buy American provisions that we're seeing through Congress right now, they don't offend you or disturb you?
No, they do offend me, but
I think,
but the reason why it is less likely to move into the 1930s sort of freestyle American-style wrestling with no rules and no holds barred is because countries like Canada reacted so strongly. and said, Ontario retaliation, which they were talking about, which must have come through, that is a pointer to the fact that the world economy today is so interdependent that if you convey the signal that I'm going to be able to hit you back and your exporters are also going to be affected, that automatically in democratic systems raises from the ground up the notion that we should not start playing this game. And therefore, I welcome Canadian retaliation. If you just lie there saying, well, that's the Americans and so on, that's not going to help, because President Obama, the pressure is brought by Caterpillar, by GE, even GM today in whatever state it is. All these firms, Boeing, they have international sales. And if you look at the US map, every state, I'm putting it together for a book I'm writing, has major export interests. They're the ones who go in and say, look, here is Canada retaliating, here is China retaliating, here is, the Indians might take away orders for nuclear reactors from GE and give them to Russia and so on. That's what matters. And therefore, I think it's a stabilizing force in the modern economy today.
Let me ask you about another trend that we have seen in the last couple of years in this country. For example, we've had the Doha round of trade is stalled, and so Canada has signed free trade deals with Panama, with Jordan, Peru, Colombia, European Free Trade Association. Given what's happening in Doha, or perhaps not happening, is this a good second option?
No, I don't think so, because I think sometimes it's better to do nothing than to do things which are, or the first worst, you might be saying. Because the reason why, Canada is a reasonably big player, so I'm not trying to compliment Canada, I've already done that enough on the program. But I think I object to the United States proliferating such agreements, but I don't object to, say, Colombia or Peru, Singapore, Chile, the relatively small countries going into these arrangements, because they're looking for access to the American market. I think the real problem is that these agreements are multiplying so rapidly around the world that they're really leading to a collapse of the non-discriminatory principle, which is at the heart of the expansion of world trade. You don't want to be mixed up in all kinds of special deals and so on. Like EU is about the worst offender, and there are only 5 countries with which they have MFN treatment, which is called Most Favored Nation treatment. And of course, these are big countries, but still, there are 5 countries. Everybody else has special treatment. So I told,
they're meaningless.
So I told Pascal Lamy, why do you call it the MFN clause? You should call it the LFN, the Least Favored Nation clause. All the others have better treatment. So, but the Europeans are very much into treating trade in a way which is really part of their foreign policy and so on. So I think, going back again to the Doha round, I think if people increasingly opt out on the basis of pessimism at the Doha round, that means you don't have any troops. So you have Pascal Lamy and your prime minister and a few others, enlightened people. They're the generals who are playing for the Doha round, but they have no leader, have no followers, you see. Without the troops, what can you do? So I think we have to be not impatient in a degree where we opt for these kinds of options. We should, I think another year, it is doable in my opinion, and I write about it, but I think it is not just excessive optimism. There are ways in which you can say, look, we can actually do it, provided we put our shoulders to the wheel and work at it.
Work at it we shall. We're very grateful you came into TVO tonight. Have a good time in the province of Ontario at CG on the weekend, and I'll see you there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.